All right, it is noon, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Dyknow's Student-Centered Summit. My name is Tiara Lustig. I am the marketing manager here at Dyknow. I will be your event facilitator and host today. We're so excited to have you join us for this great conversation. The reason we're hosting today's event is we feel that throughout the past year, there's been a really big emphasis on teachers and helping teachers adjust to remote learning, really focusing on how do we adjust to this new environment that learning is happening in these new learning styles. And as we prepare to go into the summer months, conducting professional development, preparing to go back into the classroom in the fall, it's really important that we prioritize students and focus on a student-centered approach, making sure that they have the differentiation, the personalization, and the instruction they need to make them really effective learners back in the classroom once we go back in the fall. So we're looking forward to a great event today. Before I jump into it, for anyone who's unfamiliar with Dyknow, want to give a brief overview to Dyknow and where you can find us. Dyknow is a monitoring solution for school-issued devices. We offer 2 monitoring modules: classroom management for teachers to defeat distractions in the classroom on school-issued devices, and device impact measurement for administrators and tech coaches to get complete device usage data and really understand how devices are being used and how the technology tools they've invested in are being used at the school and district level. So if anyone, I'm sure we have a lot of existing customers joining us. If anyone's interested in learning more, you can head over to dyknow.com, check out our website, check out all of our content. And speaking of our content channels, not only do we host these virtual events, we have a lot of other places where we are curating and creating resources for K-12 educators. You can find us at our Tackling Tech podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Both of our panelists today have been guests on our podcast, as well as some of our YouTube series. We also have a blog where we post helpful resources on all topics in K-12 education and technology integration. So go check that out on our website. And then we also have a couple different YouTube series, the Tech Coach Corner series and the Dyknow Digest series, where you can get some quick digestible videos on tips for ed tech and tips for Dyknow. Last but not least, if you are joining us today, you're familiar with our digital event series. Since our last event, we've actually added a couple new types of events that I wanted to highlight today. We have added our Dyknow Lunch and Learns that's hosted by myself and Casey Higgs, who is our Director of School Success. And this is for existing customers and people who are new to Dyknow to learn about new features or new ways to use Dyknow in their classrooms. Those are hosted on a monthly basis, and our next one is coming up on June 28th. You can register for that on our website if you haven't already. And then we also have recurring weekly live demos of Dyknow if you'd like to see Dyknow in action without scheduling a one-on-one demo with our team. You can register for those on our website as well. All right, that is all I have to plug today in terms of Dyknow. So let's jump into today's event. What you can expect from today is this live stream is being recorded as always. It will be made available on YouTube following the event, as well as emailed to all of the registrants and attendees from today. So if you couldn't attend live, we'll still send you the recording and you'll be able to watch the full event afterwards once we've closed it out today. We don't have the chat available in Zoom, but you can submit any questions that you have through the Q&A tool, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. We'll designate about 10 minutes at the end of the event for your questions. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions prior to the event. We're using those questions to really drive our topics today and what we'll be discussing. Last but not least, I'm sure everyone who's attending would like a certificate to show that they attended if they're interested in getting professional development credit. So if you attended today, you will receive an email with that recording, as well as a certificate of attendance to submit to your team and show that you attended, as well as get that PD credit if you qualify. All right, we are ready to get into our discussion. Today, I am thrilled to have Todd Nesloney and LaQuisha Hall on our panel. They've both worked with us in the past on our podcast, as well as some other content channels. So I'm gonna ask them to unmute themselves, turn their videos on. I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll jump into our discussion. Todd, LaQuisha, welcome. So glad to have you on our panel today. Would you mind giving a brief introduction to yourselves before we jump into our discussion?
Yeah, I'll let LaQuisha go first.
You are so awesome. So, hi everyone, I'm LaQuisha Hall. I am Currently a coach in Baltimore City Public Schools for Opportunity Culture, but this is my 18th year, and I've spent the last 17 years as a literacy educator in my school district, as well as being the Teacher of the Year in 2018. I am excited to be here today because in my teaching role and in my coaching role, it is extremely important to me that we keep students first. I believe that, and I say often that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have a job, number one. And number two, it is our responsibility to ensure that they are fully equipped for what's to come. And there's so much coming down the pipe in our society and in the world. And a lot of it looks like it's going to be challenging. So we have a hard job ahead, but we can do it. And so thank you so much for having me today. Todd.
Yeah, I'm Todd Nesloney. I have been elementary teacher, an elementary principal, and now I'm the director of culture and strategic leadership for the Texas Elementary Principal Association. I've written a few books, including Kids Deserve It, and my newest one's called When Kids Lead. And one thing that I'm really passionate about is eliminating excuses, but also empowering students and adults to do what's best for our field and what's best for students, not at the detriment of our own mental health and our own capacity for what we can handle, but still being able to say, I'm not going to let things get in the way when I'm passionate about something. I'm going to figure out a way to make it happen, because that's how we make change and that's how we do incredible things.
Definitely. You both are so passionate about student-centered instruction and just have such great philosophies when it comes to students and teachers building that relationship as well as leadership at all levels of the school and classroom. I think the way I want to start off this conversation today is by talking very high level about what does it mean to be student-centered? What does a student-centered approach really look like in the classroom or at the school as a whole? LaQuisha, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So first, I just want to say that one of the things that I have done, and I'm sharing this now. It has been a practice of mine for years as an educator, but I'm sharing this now because I've seen a lot of talk in the education world on how to address our young people. So I always refer to them as scholars, which is just a lifelong learner, and I let them know that their learning extends beyond my classroom. And even when I taught them something as an educator, that they should fact check me as well, right? And so if you are listening and there's a lot going on with making sure that you're using our young people's appropriate pronouns and all these different, calling them the names that they want to be called, scholar was a word that I used to empower my students. And there were times when if I just happened to not call them scholar, they would be out of sorts because they wanted to be addressed as something that they saw as an elevated position. And so I'm sharing that because that is a part of student-centered learning, making sure that they know that I see them maybe even above where they may see themselves. Sometimes kids come to our schools and they already feel deficient. They already don't like the subject that you teach or don't really want to be in school. And so saying those types of things to them can empower them. I think it's important when we lead in student-centered instruction that we seek out their interests, that we learn about their culture, even something as simple as learning about the music they listen to, the artists, the radio stations, learning their dances, even if you look ridiculous trying to do it, allowing them to teach you how to do the dance. Those are things that you can even infuse in your instruction to drive it in a way that engages them. I think it's important to consider their voice in your relationships with them. And what I mean by that is we have to walk away from the teacher being the only leader in the classroom and allowing our scholars to know that they also lead, that they are co-leaders in the classroom and that we are also learning from them, which helps us build relationships with them because they don't see us any longer as an authoritarian, but more as a guide and a support to them in their educational journey.
You know, when I think about student-led or student-focused classrooms, a lot of it is exactly like what LaQuisha just said. And it all comes down to relationships, number one. And no matter what age students you're working with, no matter what your role is in education, and by me saying no matter what age students, some of you are working with adults, those are students too. And so we don't not become students when we turn 18. It's like any of those are students. So I want you to keep a very open mind here and a broad range of what LaQuisha and I are talking about. But I think so long of our careers, we have made teaching all about us. We say it's about the kids. We say that's why we're there. But we design the classroom, we design the lessons, we assign the homework, we plan the events. And so if you're talking about a real student-led environment, a real student-focused environment, my questions are always, first of all, like I just said, did you design the entire classroom? Because if you design the entire classroom, you have not made a student-focused classroom. Because for me, I had to have some control over that. You know, I'm a control freak, but I got to live in that classroom all day too. So I'm not telling you to give up everything for the kids, but I always left one wall in my classroom completely blank. And the kids and I would design that together and update it together. I had a group of students who every month it rotated who got to do it, but every month they got to redesign the layouts of the desks in the classroom. And we did it together so we could make sure we were abiding by fire laws and all that other kind of stuff. But then I started thinking about even making a student-focused classroom where it was like every Friday, I gave my students an anonymous survey where they could say what they enjoyed that week in my class, what they didn't enjoy, something that I may have done that hurt their feelings or confused them. And for me, I had to take away my thin skin. I had to stop saying I'm so offended. I can't believe they saw this. I had to look at it from their perspective and say, if I'm designing a classroom, if I'm designing a learning environment and a learning experience that is truly student-centered, they have to be part of every conversation. And it's hard. It's painful sometimes. It is, but what you'll find is you make so much further strides in their education because they trust you. They would move heaven and earth for you. They forgive you more quickly than ever before. And they realize that, like LaQuisha said, you're not the authoritarian of the room. You're just the adult leading the instruction. They are equally involved in everything that happens. And so it's shifting that mindset of this is my room, it's my class, I went to college for this. And instead of saying it's ours, and truly meaning that it's ours by the action that you take.
I love both of those responses. I think when I hear your responses and I think about student-centered approaches to learning, it's obviously not something that's new. We're not talking about it today because it's a new concept that's coming to light. The reason we're talking about it is because for the past year plus, we've been out of the classroom, and that kind of ability to be student-centered has been a little more challenging, especially in that aspect of relationship building that you both talked about. Why is it so important that we're focusing on student-centered instruction, student-centered approaches right now? And why is it so important to prioritize that in professional development and efforts that we're going to be participating in over the summer before we go back to the classroom?
That's a really great question that I first think that all educators should just reflect on internally. Like, why should I personally uh, ensure that I'm focused on students as I go back into the new school year? And um, what surfaces a lot could be personal. Like, you as an individual educator might feel burnt out, or you might feel overwhelmed, and all of those things from this past school year, and feel that way, um, understandably so, because it was a very challenging year. It's important though to recognize that you feel that way so that you can do what's necessary, even seek out the supports that you personally need so that you can enter the new school year ready to receive your scholars in the way that you need to. I believe that it's important to focus on this because our young people have gone through just as much as we have. So there is no one who has been exempt from the pandemic. We all were looking at computer screens, and even though, you know, teachers might have been looking at a bunch of black squares, so were our students at that same time simultaneously. And I think it's important that we recognize that we are in a much we're in a better place because we're mature enough to understand how to move forward, how to seek the support and help. But a lot of our young people have no idea of what to do next, where to go next, how to even readjust to what school should look like and what it should be. And it seems like most of our school districts across the country are going back to what school used to look like. And so when you consider that maybe they've gotten used to just rolling over in bed and turning on their computer, that they now have to get out of bed and go back into a school building, sit in a classroom with students, and also that underlying fear still that might be prevalent in regards to COVID, just making sure that we address that internally for ourselves and for them, and making sure that we let them know that they're in a safe place with us, that they can trust us again after not seeing us for over a year, and that the routines that we put in place and the activities that we are going to do is to provide that environment that we wanted to have on Zoom, but may not have been able to, right? And so I think as educators right now, it's important for us to just do a lot of reflection and self-care. I know self-care is thrown around a lot, but it is important that we do that. So as much as we might say, I'm tired, I'm tired of hearing our school districts talk about self-care and all that, we still have to do something because we still have a very important job to do to take care of ourselves. And just remembering what school used to look like and making it even better and infusing what we've used during the pandemic to continue to engage our young people. So now we got the technology. Now we got the all the apps that are cool and the ways to engage them, not going back to worksheets, not going back to just writing on the board and asking them to copy. Engaging them in those conversations that we had to have on Zoom because that was the only way you could engage them a lot of times when you couldn't see them. And then making sure that we spend a significant amount of time, and you know, significant is determined based on the individual, on getting to know them in a way that's more than surface level. So not just asking them to say their name and their favorite food and color, but maybe talking a little bit more about what the pandemic looked like for them, what they appreciated about their learning during that time and what they didn't appreciate. Did they lose anyone? How are they dealing with it? What kind of things should I put in place as an educator to support you if you become overwhelmed at any point in the school year? So I think it's more important now than ever to have those kind of conversations, whereas in the past in education, they may have been brushed over for the sake of moving into the curriculum.
You know, I think you hit the nail on the head with so much that you just said. And, you know, I'm such a believer that no matter what we go through as humans, there are learning opportunities involved. And no matter how difficult it may be, and we may not see the learning opportunities in the midst of the struggle, this pandemic has had a lot of struggle. But I think it has brought some things to light. I think if we allow this pandemic to, it can really show us what's possible with education. And that doesn't mean that we move completely to online learning. I think we all kind of learned that's not what most of us prefer to do. But when it comes to why this is important, I think it's for me, the pandemic was a reflectional moment to say, I don't like the way we're teaching right now during the pandemic, but I also don't want to go back exactly the way I used to do it, because there are elements of things that I've learned. And oh my gosh, when I allow this conversation to happen, or when I highlight this way of learning, better things can take place. And so I think it's that idea of saying we can't go back to the way things were. We can't just take just fall back into our old worksheets, whatever, however we did things. And that doesn't mean we have to completely change everything, but especially when we've had the last year and a half that we've had, I think being able to change that student focus and really being able to focus on that, that's what the kids want. They want to know that when they re-enter that classroom, they're more than just a name on a page. They're more than just a paycheck for you to get. And I think that goes back to what we kind of said at the beginning, was the relational piece has to be the foundation of everything that you do. And so focusing that first and reconnecting with people and tearing down walls we may have built up and ways that we may have forgotten how to hold conversations and how to make people feel seen when they're not in front of a computer screen and their voice is valued when they're not allowed to click mute, like all those kind of things. Some of us have to relearn how to do all of that. And so I think it's really important for us to sit back and say, what do we want education to look like? What do we believe kids are capable of? And when we get down to that basic of basics, then we start rebuilding what our classroom can look like for the rest of that school year.
I think you both just so well put together kind of what everyone's feeling like right now. We're so excited to go back into the classroom and have that environment that we're used to and have more engagement, more energy, but there's also that hesitation around we've had so many great innovations during COVID with technology and new strategies and things like that that we're, hesitant to go back because we don't want to revert and unlearn everything that we had to learn during the pandemic. So I think it's kind of that push and pull of what are strategies that should stay in place from prior to the pandemic that really did enhance the classroom, and then what can we take from this past year and really embed it into the classroom to be student-centered and engage students. And I think a direct byproduct of student-centered instruction is student engagement. When students have more personalized learning, when they have better relationships with their instructors, they are more engaged in the lessons and feel like they're learning on a higher level than they would otherwise. What are some strategies or technology tools or anything that you think teachers can implement in their classrooms or kind of would help them make that student-centered instruction kind of go to the next level when they return to the classroom or prepare for that over the summer? Todd, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, for me, I think about when I get to know my students and figure out their likes and dislikes, I love incorporating that into the things that I plan. And so I think some of that's hard to do because we may think, oh, last year our kids loved TikTok. I'm going to put TikTok in everything. But then you plan all that this summer, and then in August, a new platform launches and everybody's on that instead of TikTok. Well, now your lesson isn't cool anymore. And so I get the pre-planning idea that we want to do as educators. So many of us want to be prepared way ahead of time. We want to have all this planned, but I think you can form skeleton lessons that you then can add in their likes, what they're interested in. But I also think it's important where you don't lose yourself in trying to be everything for your students. For me, what that meant was I was talking to them. I was seeing, like, when I was in the classroom, it was like, oh, you're totally into Pokemon, or you're totally into Minecraft, or Walking Dead is really big for you. Like, we're going to do a whole zombie theme. Like, I was always thinking this stuff. But then in my mind, I'm also going, but I love gardening, or I love exercise, or I love yoga or knitting, or whatever you may like in your own life. I'm going to bring in my stuff too. And I brought in my likes when it was the content that was really difficult for me to try to make exciting. I don't know about you, but there was always standards that I had to teach that I hated teaching because it was like, this is so boring. I hate this stupid thing. Why does the state require this? But I had to teach it. And if I came in there with an attitude, my kids would know and they wouldn't care to learn it anyway. So those were the lessons where I brought in my likes so that I liked teaching that lesson just a little bit more. But as far as with students, it was getting to know them. And it was also not being afraid to really mix up the way that I'd done learning. I love taking learning outside. I love using new tools. I love bringing in guests to facilitate my learning opportunities. And I don't just think of the family as guests. I would always reach out to the city mayor, to the city manager, to businesses that I frequented quite often who already knew me because I was always in there getting a coffee 4 days a week or whatever it was, to get them to come in and say, hey, I'm doing this lesson because I taught math. I'm doing this lesson over multiplying decimals and things like that. Can you come in from Starbucks and do this, why tax is important and how you figure it out and how they can multiply and bring some Starbucks? And they'd come and do it. And it was totally cool because it's somebody they'd see in the community. It's something that interested them. And I mean, it was 5th grade. They're not going to get a job the next day, but that might be reading something in their head of, ooh, this is interest for me down the road. Because I know this is a total tangent, but what I will say too is I was never an educator, and I'm still not today, who pushes that college is the only route. And so I always want kids to know there are so many opportunities to be successful in life. You can find a trade, you can be the next entrepreneur, you could go do this technology stuff, or you could go to college. Like, there's lots of paths that all lead to success as long as you're doing something you're passionate about. And so just getting to know them and incorporating what they want into the lessons, I think is a good starting point, and it allows my creativity to flow. And I hate when people tell me they're not creative, because I just want to be clear. You can talk to any doctor you want. Nobody is born with the creative gene. Nobody can go and take a test and be like, oh man, you got lucky. Your mom had the creative gene, so it passed down to you. It doesn't happen. It's just like nobody's born playing a sport. Like you don't just pick up a basketball one day and then you're as good as Michael Jordan. Like, no, it's creativity is like any other skill. You have to practice it. So if you're listening and thinking, okay, Todd, I get it, but I'm not creative. Like I can't come up with stuff like that. Just you need to practice it. The more you practice it, the more people you connect with, the more social media tools you use, resources that are online. Like we live in the 2021, people. You can't claim you don't know how to do something because all you got to do is Google it. There's a YouTube video for everything. There's a podcast for everything. So you can't say I'm not creative. All you got to say is you're lazy, because that may be offensive to you, but you are lazy if you can't figure out how to do it, because everything's out there. We just got to put the work in. And I'm speaking to myself here too. I want y'all to know there are times that my wife holds me accountable when I'm like, I don't know how to do that. And she's like, did you Google it? I've heard you speak on that before. And I'm like, okay, yes, I'll go and take the time to learn how to do it now instead of making an excuse on why I don't want to do it.
So I first just want to say that Todd just became my education bestie. Like everything he said, I'm just like, yes. I mean, literally all the way down to the strategies. I do the same thing. We say similar things. I hate when people tell me they're not creative. I'm also an artist, so I use that a lot in that world as well. But some strategies that I think are important, just to add, first of all, listen to everything that Todd just said. And then also add, now is an important time to consider what our routines look like again, right? So we've been out of practice with that. We might have had a time that we logged in for class, but it didn't look exactly the way it did when we were in school before. And kids like structure, adults like structure. And so I think it's important to consider what those routines will look like and being okay with varying those routines, so that it's not monotonous. And then also, um, I love what Todd shared about sharing, or not losing himself and sharing what he liked with his students at that time. And um, that is so important. And even being vulnerable with your scholars is extremely important. I am a survivor of abuse, and I recognize that that is an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people, but I'm in a place in my life where I'm empowered enough to use my story to help others. And I've shared that with my classes just to let them know, if you have gone through something really difficult, so has your teacher, we are not far removed from each other. That in itself is a strategy in creating that classroom culture of it's okay to share here, it's okay to be yourself here. We all are learning, we all have hurt, we all have room to grow. And so when Todd mentioned not losing himself, also sharing yourself is just as important, right? And so I might share that I love art or gardening or something like that, but also share some of your struggles. Because sometimes our young people will look at us and say, oh, you went to college, you got a job, I get it, you're smart. We want to let them know, okay, but I messed up too. Like I told my teacher my dog ate my homework and I didn't have a dog, right? So we're the same, and letting them know that, because it's so important to show our human side now and acknowledge the human side in others. I like what Todd, I'm referring a lot to Todd because he is, I told y'all, my education bestie now. Um, Bringing in guests is great. And during the pandemic, I was able, when I was still teaching, to not only teach a book, it was The Other Wes Moore, but I also was able to contact Wes Moore and have him come virtually talk to my students. So that making that connection for them was extremely powerful because one, he's from Baltimore and that's where my students are. And then two, they read all about him and then got to hear from him. That probably would not have been as likely if we were still in person because he lives in New York. He probably couldn't just come to my classroom. But because we have all these options and alternative ways to bring people in so that our students are exposed to them, I think it's important to continue that practice when we go back in person. And then also just one of the biggest strategies that we have to remember, like every single day, is giving grace, right? To ourselves, to our scholars, and to our administrators. Like, I will be the first to admit that I didn't have a lot of grace for the admin. So I was like, why are they sending me this email at 7 o'clock at night? They know I'm off. Just considering that it might have been so much happening in the school day that that was the only time that they could send me that email, right? And then if I'm not able to respond to it at that hour, it's okay. That's the time that they could send it and respond to it when I can, but not like berating them because they sent it to me at 7 p.m., right? And so adopting that grace mindset, because unfortunately we don't always have it. We feel like if I give you an instruction, you should follow it, and that's the period at the end of the sentence. But we need to change that period to an ellipses and add some space for something to be added to that sentence, right? Allow kids to redo something, retake a test, to tell you what's wrong if they opted out of participating in the class, and you just wanted to punish them with that zero. Like, I just think it's important now more than ever to show them that we have their back and we all came from challenge. And then don't forget, Todd mentioned the TikToks, and that was so good and powerful. But don't forget those things that work, right? Because we can get into such a routine ourselves that we'll go back to what education looked like before and forget all about TikTok, even with the skeleton overview of the year, right? So don't forget those things that worked. You're sitting in front of them. You might not use technology as much as you did when we were teaching virtually. Don't forget to infuse it somehow, enhance it, use it to enhance instruction in the classroom, and also make it a balance, right? They've been on the computers for over a year. Like, don't make everything so digital that they tired of it. They like over you, computers, cell phones, all that. Giving them space to look at each other and really talk, to have social skills again, right? And so I just think all of this is important. And Todd mentioned resources, Googling things. There are so many books that could be read, so many professional developments that can be taken. My only concern is just make sure that you do your research on the resource before you delve into it. Some of the things that we can feed ourselves are not good for ourselves, right? And so just being intentional with what you're learning from.
Yeah, there is so much to unpack there in what each of you just shared. LaQuisha, I will say what you shared on giving grace and having a grace mindset, I think is so, so important, especially after, we all have been through a very traumatic year of just being in a global pandemic. I think that's something that, we teachers and students can both relate on a very human level. And so I think sharing those trials and tribulations that came with that, as well as the victories that came from it, are really important to building that relationship and giving grace, because we're in a very unique time period in education and for our students and teachers. You both touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think when we talk about a student-centered classroom, we think a lot about the students' role in that. And a large role that students play in that is being a leader, both in their own learning, a leader for their peers in the classroom, and maybe a leader outside of the classroom as well. Todd, you mentioned, disciplines outside of just going to university as being an option for students, being important to them. And leadership is a huge aspect of being able to choose what path you want to go on, being able to choose, what is your future going to look like, and empowering them to make those decisions. What are some kind of tactics or pieces of advice that you could give teachers who want to empower their students to be leaders, both in and outside of the classroom, as we go back to school?
Yeah, this is such an important topic to me. I believe so much in leadership. I believe that leadership doesn't have an age, and I hate when we act like you have to be of a certain age to be considered a leader, because that's not reality at all. And I don't think there is a definitive answer for what is a leader, because everybody leads differently. I like to remind people, and we talk about this quite often in my book, When Kids Lead, is just that leadership is not the loudest person in the room. Leadership is not the first person to raise their hand and volunteer. Leadership is not the person who's most comfortable speaking in front of a crowd. Those are forms of leadership, but it's not the sole definition of leadership. And so for me, when I think about it, it's how can I empower every student to find their own leader within? And I know for me, what I tell a lot of people is people don't believe that I'm actually an extreme introvert. Conversation terrifies me. I didn't sleep at all because of this presentation today. This is so exhausting to me that afterwards I'm gonna need like an hour and a half nap and a big bottle of water in a dark room just to recover. But you don't know that when I'm here, because you would be totally bored out of your mind if I talked in monotone and really chill. I have to bring the energy to make, especially behind a computer screen, to make this exciting. But being an introvert myself, I remember what it was like being a student in school. And I remember how often introverts can be overlooked, or how often introverts can be stereotyped as all the same. Oh, well, you're an introvert. You don't ever want to speak, so I'm just going to let you write. And it's like, well, that's not true. Not every introvert is the same. Not every extrovert is the same. And so as you get to know your students, you know how hard you can push them. Not every student can be pushed the same way. I know there's some of my introvert students that are terrified of speaking, but I can push them and push them and push them and push them, and then they will eventually try some things that are outside of their comfort zone. I know there's other students that I can barely push them forward without them breaking because they're so fragile, or they've had so many negative experiences with other adults and things like that. So as I get to know my kids, I know how hard I can push them. But the point is, I'm pushing all of them. And I'm not pushing all of them to fit the same mold either. I'm pushing them to get a little uncomfortable, to step a little bit outside their normal zone of influence, because we learn when we are uncomfortable. We don't learn when we agree with everything the speaker says. We don't learn when we always are like, oh, this is so easy. No, we're not learning anything. We're just being reaffirmed with what we already knew and believed. And so that means for some of my students, I find that the best, I have a friend of mine who is not good in front of crowds. He would never want to speak in front of a crowd, but I view him as a crazy good leader because he can write the best emails. And what I mean by that is I'm not always as unemotional as I need to be in some important emails. I tend to use a lot of exclamation points and express myself far too much. And so anytime I have a really important email that I need to send, I send to him and he fixes it and rewords it, and then I can send it out. He's a leader in my eyes, and he's never speaking in front of anybody. You don't know his face. You don't know his name. He's not active on social media, but that is an excellent skill of his. And that is a leadership skill, being able to communicate in writing. Me, I'm not as good in stressful situations with that. And so he helps me with that. And so when I think about, that's just one example of what a leader can be. Maybe a leader is great at leading a small group of 3 to 4 instead of leading a group of 100. Maybe a leader is the one who has exceptional organizational skills. And so they're behind the scenes putting everything into folders with color-coded tabs, and they keep you on track. You need those leaders. And so when you're thinking about this, that's something you have to keep in mind. Extroverts are leaders, introverts are leader. Get out the stereotypical definition of, oh, they have to be this great speaker who volunteers all the time and who did. No, they don't. Yeah, that's a type of leader, and that's great. Let them pursue that and push them outside their comfort zone. You know how do you push an extrovert outside their comfort zone? Make them be quiet. That's how you push an extrovert out. Like, there's so many ways to take and do this, but it's all about us stop thinking so stereotypically about things and helping others see their strengths. Because what I found while working with kids and adults, most of us cannot see our own strengths. Most of us don't feel secure in what we bring to the table, but others who are watching us are able to say, no, stop that. You are fantastic at this. Keep working at it, because I really look up to you when it comes to this, or I need somebody on my team who can do this. So our jobs is a lot like cheerleaders too. We have to find those strengths in our colleagues and in our students to bring those out, to help them see what they bring to the table, because then they're going to push themselves further too.
So Todd stepped on all my toes today and my fingers, and I love it. um, One thing that I can add to all that Todd shared, because I agree, let's just put on record, I agree with everything he says. I don't care what it is. Um, but leaders also learn from challenges. That goes from the little leaders all the way to the big leaders, right? And so, and that's why we have leaders, because we have challenges that are going to arise, and we need someone that can help us get through them, right? And so, um, I think in teaching our scholars to be leaders, that it's important for us to step away from that traditional form of teaching where we ask a question and there's an expected, anticipated response. So, not looking for the correct answer all the time. And if a scholar is answering you, allowing them to grapple, because that is how they learn the critical thinking that can help them overcome a challenge later. Like sometimes we're so quick, and people joke about it a lot. Teachers are like, okay, if you look on page 9 in the second paragraph, you might find what you're looking for. If we don't tell them the page number and paragraph, and we allow them the space to not only grapple with what they think the answer should be and where they should find it, but also hear from their peers on what their thoughts are, that's when you form a community who can now come together and advocate for themselves in a unique way, right? Because you're not standing at the center passing out all the answers. That's how you create leaders, is by allowing them to solve problems and allowing them that space to struggle productively in order to determine the solutions that are needed, and then offering them choice, allowing them to do things their way. So we often have this. Um, we have a curriculum, we have a way that we want students to produce the work. And so we say, hey y'all, after we read this, do this assignment, I want you to write this essay or do this math problem and show your work. Why not give them what you want the end product to be, but allow them to create and form those steps? That's how you create a leader, because you're now allowing them the opportunity to think, how can I show my teacher that I understood what was taught in my way and make it look creative in interesting way to me personally? And you'll be amazed at what our young people can come up with. And I think when we take ourselves out of that box of being the leader of the classroom, that's when we actually create the leaders in our scholars. And then finally, just wanted to share that allowing their voice in the classroom. So I feel, don't do enough of that. Sometimes we are looking for, again, correct answers, or we only allot 10 to 15 minutes for classroom discussion and then we cut it off. We have to be more flexible in the way we approach things in the classroom in order to cultivate leaders. Leaders sometimes have to be more flexible in their schedule. If I'm leading a group, and I don't know a leader in history that didn't have to change their schedule or change something up in order to make something happen. So as a leader among leaders, we have to change our lessons sometimes, or we have to adjust that time frame. If the scholars that we're teaching are really into a conversation or really into a lesson, not being so um, stringent on our time that we're like, okay, y'all, we got to shut this down. You're the last person to speak, because you have no idea what leader had another innovative idea that you missed because we were so focused on trying to implement things in the way we think they should go. So when you're trying to create leaders in the classroom, really allow them to lead and allow them to take you somewhere versus you taking them somewhere. And so that y'all all can learn as a community.
I love both of those responses. There's so many great pieces of advice and nuggets in there for leadership. One of the questions that we got from a registrant prior to the event was around other leaders in the school, tech coaches. And so during this time of remote learning, a lot of tech coaches shifted into a role of more of a tech support role rather than an instructional coaching role. I think that's not a unique scenario for tech coaches. A lot of individuals within a school had to shift their role due to the pandemic and due to remote learning. What is your advice or take on if you had to transition into a different role for remote learning, or part of your role was kind of eliminated because it wasn't needed as much during that time, or something else was a higher priority. How do you kind of revert back into your prior role and the role that you previously held in the classroom? And I think specifically in a coaching role, how do you transition back into being in that instructional coaching role and helping teachers, prioritize putting students first and using technology to help them do that?
Todd and I got this thing going on. One of the things that I will share is earlier I mentioned how important it is for us to readjust over the summer so that we're prepared for school when we go back, and our scholars specifically. The question you just asked is another reason why that preparation is important. So the truth is, Tiara, we don't know what anybody's role is going to be when we go into it. You might think you're going in as an English teacher or a math teacher one day. You come out a counselor, somebody's mom, and nurse. So and I know that's more of a relaxed example of how your role can change, but we all need to be hands on deck at this time in education, because the truth is we don't know what these young people have experienced outside of us for the past year and some change. Some of them have lost very close family members to the pandemic, or they've lost people in general. They have experienced isolation. Some of them didn't have a lot of friends prior to the pandemic. So if you can just imagine, you're not conversing with anyone for over a year, and you're just looking at Zoom for a year. So it's so many things that they're going to be grappling with that we can't go into any role thinking this is my job, this is all I'm doing today. We have to have more of a flexibility with what it is that we plan to perform when we go into a school building. And I think also when it comes to transitioning into roles, that's what we need to keep at the forefront of our mind. I'm here to do what's needed and necessary in this moment in time for our population of students. What do they need right now? Maybe when we were on Zoom, they needed help with logging in, but now they need the instructional support again because we're back in person. Just trying to channel and study and prepare for that over the summer, I think, is our best bet. Because when we get so stuck on what we think we should do, that's when we also miss opportunities, as I was sharing earlier.
I think LaQuisha made a great comment there about you don't know what your students have been through. And as an instructional coach, moving back into that position of being an instructional coach, I think it's equally as important that you don't know what your colleagues have been through. And so you don't know who has lost a family member but isn't comfortable talking about it at school. You don't know who's faced a breakup due to COVID. You don't know who has suffered their own health concerns that they don't want to talk about, or who has lost income with a second job, or all those kind of things play into the kind of educators and people that we are. And so I think one of the things that I encourage instructional coaches to remember is that a phrase that I repeat often and that I have to remind myself often, and that is hurting people hurt others. And when you have kids that are going to lash out at your ideas, when you have colleagues that are going to lash out at the way you help, don't take it personally. Just know that hurting people hurt others, and there's something going on with them or in their life that is causing them to lash out the way they do, and that you can just approach them in a different way. I think the beginning of the year should be a really fragile time of year for people. There's a lot of nervousness of, are we really getting back to all in person? And there's going to be people who are on all levels of the comfortable settings of, do I want to wear a mask? Do I want to do this? And so I think your first job as an instructional coach in the stereotypical term this next school year is to really just reconnect with people. Really rebuild the connections that you can be trusted, that you're there to help, that you are there to find resources, to encourage them, spend time in classrooms, not in an office, just watching and encouraging. A lot of teachers have been beat down this last school year and not feeling as successful as they have in the past because they weren't as good as a virtual teacher as they were as an in-person teacher. And so they feel less than. And so I think you have a great opportunity as a coach to really just spend those first couple of weeks telling educators how awesome they are, because no matter what areas they need to grow in, there's something they're doing great already. And so finding that and celebrating that before we jump right to fixing this, fill these holes. Let's do this. So you messed that up. You can't get there until you build them up first.
Yes.
Tiara, I just wanted to add something real quick to what Todd just said. Knowing something about each person that you're working with is important as well. And I'm going to share a little strategy that I've used in my coaching role that has helped me tremendously. But don't tell everybody what I'm doing, because I don't want them to know like how I'm tracking what they're doing in their lives. But I this year had to coach 17 teacher leaders across my school district in 9 schools. And that's a lot of people to keep up with, especially when you're only looking at them on a computer. And so what I would do was I would have this little notebook, and every time I talk with them or check in with them, like someone would say something like, "My dad is sick," or "Oh, my granddaughter is she has a special event coming up," and so I would take notes under each person's name in my notebook. And every time I had a conversation with them again, one of the things that I would start the conversation with, "How's your dad? Oh, how was that event that your granddaughter was in?" And they would be like, "Oh my goodness, Miss Hall." They were so happy that I not just asked them how they were doing generically, but I had like a specific point personalized to their lives to enter that conversation with. And so getting to know them like that. But if you're like me and you got a lot of people on your team, like next year I'll have 32 people that I'm responsible for. So my notebook is going to be real lit. But having a space where you can just jot down some notes on those people personally, so that you're not just generically saying, "How are you? Okay, this is what I need today," because that is another thing that teachers are really, really tired of.
That's a fantastic strategy for building relationships. You both took that question in a way different and better direction than I ever could have. I loved that portion of the conversation. And I think my takeaway from both of your responses is, the real role that everyone should have as we go back into the classroom is to build relationships and create those impactful connections, whether it's with a student, a colleague, an administrator, whoever it is. Creating those connections and building those relationships is the most important thing to prioritize. We did have someone submit, not a question in the Q&A, but they gave you both great kudos for how dynamic you are in answering these questions and spot on, and your valuable insights and perspectives. So I definitely want to echo that as we go into our last topic of the day and then answer some of the questions in the Q&A. So last topic, we've talked a lot about student-centered instruction in terms of how it compares to what's happened in the past. How are you both thinking about this type of instruction and education in general as we think about where we're going to be a year or 5 years from now, and what that looks like to fuel the future of K-12 education and progressive learning styles and really enhancing and taking the classroom to the next level?
Yeah, I'll jump in here real quickly. I saw LaQuisha point at me already. But for me, it's and I don't want this to sound like a cop-out answer, but I don't have a mindset other than being open-minded. I know change makes me uncomfortable. I know change is hard, but I've always seen that embracing change brings upon great things. There's failure along the way. Heck, I could do a 10-hour session over everything I failed within the last 6 months alone. But for me, that's where social media plays a huge role in my career. And what I mean by that is for so long use social media to consume information. And when I actually started using social media to connect with others and to collaborate with others, I saw my realm of influence grow, but also my circle that I surrounded myself with. And when my circle increased, it made every part of my career better because I had new ideas, I had new people to push me, I had new perspectives. And so I would definitely encourage people to be active on social media more than just a background consumer, to get out there. If people are on social media, they're on there for you to reach out to them, for you to connect and collaborate with them. And if they don't, delete them. You don't need to be friends with them anyway. Like, move on, go to somebody else. And yeah, there are some celebrities who won't respond, and there are some educators who have huge accounts that don't even run their own accounts. But you know what? When you find those people, they're not the majority, they're the minority. I'm on social media to connect and collaborate. I respond to everybody because that is how I've seen my professional growth flourish. And I've seen opportunities for my students that I never would have been able to think of or just out of the 1 or 2 conferences I'm allowed to attend a year as an educator or whatever, this has just opened my world up so much more.
I agree with Todd again. And also just want to share that for me, I am very intentional with being conscientious of how I entreat people. So making sure they feel seen. I used to, in having meetings with people, I used to be that person that would be checking the time. Like, okay, we only got 5 minutes for this check-in. So how are you? Oh, okay, your daughter's what? Okay, so we got a minute left. Okay, wrap it up and let's go to the work, right? But now I have been more lenient and flexible because I've recognized that what we imagine school looking like 5 and 10 years from now will be dictated by how we're treating people right now. And so if they are burned out now, feel like they're unseen right now, they're not going to want to do anything for us in 5 years. And so I want people to feel empowered when they're around me. So I'm taking that part of, or that aspect of my coaching role very, very seriously. Also, just making sure that our young people are the focus of all the work. So sometimes the further we are from the classroom, the less I hear people refer to the young people. Making sure we stay connected to them in whatever way is comfortable for you. So for example, I also, like Todd, use Twitter to connect with other educators, but I use Instagram to connect with young people. And so, seeing what they're into, having conversations with them online keeps me grounded in why this work is important and why I want education in 5 to 10 years to be excellent for them, right? So we can't lose sight of why we're in this career. We can't lose sight of whose futures are at stake if we drop the ball on how we are performing. And so, um, seeing our colleagues and then keeping students close to us, no matter what role we're in. And as a matter of fact, I think it's even more essential for administrators. Have a student that they're connected to that they can regularly converse with just so that they know and remember why their job is important.
Definitely. And I think what I've learned from working in the K-12 education industry is, Todd, like you shared, and LaQuisha, like you shared as well, educators are so willing to connect and engage and share their own strategies and tips and build that community around what they're passionate about. And I think social media, Todd, like you said, is one of the best ways to do this. I think one of the coolest things that came out of the pandemic was the global community that was created around, the singular challenge that everyone was going through, and how everyone could connect across social media to bond and learn from that challenge together. We had one question come in the chat, so I want to answer this one quickly before we go. What strategy can you share? LaQuisha, I think this is in response to the strategy you shared. What strategy can you share to use to connect when your mentees or students refuse to answer your questions or share anything about themselves?
Oh my goodness, I love those kids, first of all. One of the things that I have done that has been effective every time, never failed at this. So I give them space, number one. So I'm not in their face like with that whole I asked you a question, I'm waiting on an answer kind of vibe, right? That's the first thing, because we don't know what they're dealing with, the reason why they could be withdrawn in that moment. The next thing I would do is, after that space has been given, and when I say space, maybe overnight, like me going home and just thinking about how I should engage that young person again, I'll come back to school with a note for them. Like, hey, I'm concerned about you. I noticed yesterday this happened. Is there anything I can do to support you? Is there anything going on that I can help with? Like, making it so I am on your side regardless of what happened. First, you got to be able to forgive. Some teachers hold grudges. We know that. Well, people in general. So not being upset at their student when they return the next day because they can feel their energy. But then passing in that note and then putting at the end, right back, smiley face, something like that. You would be surprised how kids will pour into that note when they write you back. And then you're passing this note back and forth. You have already found out what's wrong. You haven't forced them to say anything verbally. And now they feel like they can connect with you and trust you because it's like this little secret relationship you got going on, but it all germinated from them not responding to you the day before. So try the note passing strategy. It's so effective. I still have some of my notes from the past as well.
That's a great strategy. And like Todd said, some students don't like speaking. So communicating through writing, nonverbal is a great way to connect as well for those students. Thank you both for being on our panel today. This was a fantastic discussion. Just like was put in the chat, you both have been so engaging and so interesting to learn from. Love the energy that you brought today. So thank you both for being with us. For everyone who's attending, we will send you the recording following the event today, along with that certificate of attendance. And we hope to see you at our next event. We'll let you all know when that is. Thank you again, LaQuisha and Todd, and we'll work with you later. Bye, everyone.